I was 28 when my world turned upside down again. My name is Allie, and I spent most of my life building myself up after both my parents abandoned me for their shiny new families. Now they suddenly want back in my life, acting like nothing happened. The funny thing is, I finally found peace without them. I created my own family of people who actually show up. So when they came knocking with empty apologies and hidden agendas, I had one response: no thanks. I'm done. If you're watching this, drop a comment, letting me know where you're from, hit that like and subscribe button, and let's talk about setting boundaries with family who only want you when it's convenient for them. My earliest memories shine with a warmth I spent years trying to recapture. When I was 5, we lived in a 2-story house in suburban Boston with a tire swing in the backyard. Dad would push me for what felt like hours while Mom took pictures and laughed at my squeals. We were the standard American family portrait those days, even had a golden retriever named Rusty. Sunday mornings meant pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse ears. Dad would stand at the stove flipping them while singing off-key to whatever played on the radio. Mom would dance around setting the table, pulling me into twirls that made my pajamas swirl. I remember the way sunlight streamed through our kitchen window, making everything golden. Back then, home felt like the safest place in the world. Holidays were magical. Mom went all out decorating for each season. Halloween meant elaborate homemade costumes. Thanksgiving brought family gatherings with cousins I rarely see anymore, and Christmas turned our home into something from a Hallmark movie. Dad would lift me on his shoulders to place the star on top of the tree. Mom would bake cookies that filled the house with cinnamon and vanilla. They both tucked me in at night, taking turns reading stories, their voices blending into my dreams. My father worked as an accountant, steady and reliable. He taught me how to ride a bike in our driveway, running alongside until I found my balance. My mother was an event coordinator with a creative streak. She helped me build fairy houses in our garden and showed me how to make daisy chains. They were both so present and engaged in my life in all those small ways that children take for granted until they disappear. I was around 7 when things began to change. The shouting started after my bedtime. At first, I thought it was just part of adult conversations I didn't understand. But soon, the tension followed them into daylight hours. My father began working late. My mother's smile appeared less frequently. The Sunday pancakes became cereal. The family movie nights faded away. I remember hiding at the top of the stairs one night, clutching my stuffed rabbit named Flopsy, listening to my mother cry. My father's voice was cold in a way I had never heard before. Words like mistake and trapped floated up to me. I didn't understand them then, but they embedded themselves deep enough that I would recognize them years later in therapy. During those months, I became an expert at reading the atmosphere. I learned which questions would make my mother's eyes fill with tears. I discovered which topics might trigger my father's sudden need to go check something in the garage. I started making myself smaller, quieter, trying to be the perfect child who wouldn't add to their problems. A pattern that would follow me for years. They sat me down one Sunday morning when I was 8. No pancakes that day. Just my parents sitting unnaturally far apart on our living room sofa while I perched on the ottoman facing them. My father cleared his throat too many times. My mother kept smoothing her pants, though there were no wrinkles. Dad was moving out, they explained. They loved me very much, they assured, but they couldn't live together anymore. It wasn't my fault, they emphasized. They would still both be my parents, they promised. Everything would be okay, they guaranteed. I believed them because children want to believe their parents. I nodded and asked practical questions about where I would sleep and whether Rusty would live in 2 places too. I didn't cry until that night, alone in my bedroom, wondering what I could have done differently. The custody arrangement seemed reasonable to the adults who created it. Weekdays with Mom in our family home now feeling too big and too quiet. Weekends with Dad in his new apartment across town that smelled like fresh paint and nothing else. 2 sets of clothes, 2 toothbrushes, 2 bedrooms that were supposed to feel equally mine. That first year was an adjustment, but they both tried. Dad took me to the zoo and movies. He attended my school play sitting alone while other parents sat in pairs. Mom maintained our traditions as best she could, though her smile seemed forced through Christmas decorating. She signed me up for soccer and cheered from the sidelines every Saturday morning before dropping me at Dad's. I started keeping 2 journals, one for each house. I became conscious of not mentioning too much about one parent to the other. I grew careful about which stories I shared in each place. At 8 years old, I was already learning to compartmentalize my life to present different versions of myself, depending on where I slept that night. Despite the changes, I held on to hope. Maybe this was just how some families worked. Maybe having two homes instead of one wasn't so bad. Maybe the promises they made that day on the couch would hold. I had no way of knowing then that I was experiencing the last months of having parents who prioritized me. It started with a text message on a Tuesday afternoon about 18 months after the divorce. Dad was running late to pick me up from soccer practice, and when he finally arrived, he seemed nervous. He took me to Friendly's instead of cooking dinner at his apartment, which was usually our Tuesday routine. "I want you to meet someone special," he said while I demolished an ice cream sundae. "Her name is Jessica, and she makes me very happy." I nodded because that seemed like what he wanted. Inside, my stomach twisted with anxiety. This wasn't part of the plan they had explained to me. No one had mentioned new people joining our fractured family. The following weekend, I met Jessica at a restaurant with cloth napkins where I felt underdressed in my jeans and sneakers. She had perfect blonde hair that didn't move when she turned her head, and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. She asked me rehearsed questions about school and soccer, calling me sweetie, even though we had just met. "Your dad talks about you all the time," she said, squeezing my father's hand across the table. I watched his face light up when he looked at her, an expression I hadn't seen since before the fighting started with my mother. It made me both happy for him and achingly sad for reasons I couldn't articulate at 10 years old. Jessica tried in those first meetings. She brought me small gifts books she thought I might like, a bracelet with a soccer ball charm. She suggested activities for our weekends together. She made an effort to include me in conversations. But I noticed how my father's attention shifted when she was around, how his focus drifted from me to her, how her opinions suddenly carried more weight than mine in decisions about what movie to watch or where to eat. 6 months into their relationship, Dad took me to the park where we used to play catch before the divorce. Instead of bringing a ball, he brought news. "Jessica and I are getting married," he announced while we sat on a bench watching ducks on the pond. "I asked her last night and she said yes. Isn't that wonderful?" I searched his face, looking for any sign that he recognized how fast everything was changing. All I saw was expectation, my father waiting for his daughter to validate his happiness. "That's great, Dad," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "Congratulations." He hugged me, then relief evident in the way his shoulders relaxed. "You'll be in the wedding, of course, a junior bridesmaid. Jessica already has ideas for your dress." The wedding planning consumed the next few months. My weekends with Dad transformed into venue visits, cake tastings, and discussions about flowers I couldn't identify. Jessica's mother took me for dress fittings where I stood still while strangers pinned fabric around me. My father seemed to exist in a bubble of pre-wedding bliss where concerns about my adjustment didn't penetrate. Their wedding took place in a garden with white chairs and an arbor covered in flowers. I walked down the aisle before Jessica in a lavender dress that itched around the collar. I stood beside her three sisters during the ceremony, feeling like an extra in someone else's story. When the officiant spoke about the beginning of a new family, I wondered where exactly I fit in this new formation. At the reception, I sat at the head table but felt invisible. Relatives and friends I barely knew kept commenting on how beautiful the bride was, how happy my father looked. A few asked me about school or commented on how much I'd grown, but their eyes would drift over my shoulder looking for more interesting conversations. Dad danced with Jessica for their first dance, then with her mother, then with each of her sisters. He never danced with me. By the time the cake was cut, I had retreated to a corner table with my book, a habit that would become my shield at many future family gatherings. 3 months after the wedding, Dad and Jessica invited me to dinner at their new house, a 2-story colonial in a neighborhood with better schools than mine. I noticed immediately that the guest room where I had been staying at Dad's apartment had been transformed into a home office in this new space. My belongings had been consolidated to a small corner of a multi-purpose room with a pull-out sofa. "We have some exciting news," Jessica announced, serving lasagna she had clearly not made herself based on the bakery container in the trash. "We're having a baby." My father beamed, placing his hand over Jessica's on the table. "You're going to be a big sister, Allie. Isn't that wonderful?" I nodded and smiled because that's what was expected. Inside, a cold realization was taking root. The room arrangement suddenly made sense. I was being phased out before I even understood what was happening. My half-sister Zoe arrived 7 months later, a pink bundle that consumed all of my father's attention and conversation. My weekend visits became exercises in invisibility. Dad spent most of the time holding the baby, photographing the baby, discussing the baby. Jessica was usually napping or busy with feeding schedules. I was left to entertain myself, an increasingly unwelcome visitor in a household centered around their real family. "Isn't she perfect?" Dad would ask, showing me yet another photo of Zoe doing exactly what she had been doing during my last visit. Sleeping, staring, or making a barely perceptible expression that somehow warranted 50 pictures. The canceled weekends began when Zoe was about 3 months old. "She's got a bit of a cold," Dad would say over the phone. "Jessica thinks it's better if we don't expose you." Or, "We had a rough night with the baby. Can we reschedule?" The rescheduling rarely happened. One missed weekend became 2, then 3. Soon, my time with Dad dwindled to once a month, then special occasions only. Phone calls that once lasted 30 minutes shortened to 5, with my father distracted and often interrupted by baby needs in the background. On my 12th birthday, Dad dropped off a gift but didn't come inside. It was a generic art set for a child much younger than me. The card was signed, "Love, Dad, Jessica, and Zoe," in my father's handwriting, though I noticed Dad was the only part that didn't look rushed. By the time I was 13, I had learned not to expect consistency from my father. Christmas involved a quick gift exchange in a coffee shop parking lot. Thanksgiving meant a strained 2 hours at his house where I sat quietly while everyone cooed over Zoe's newest accomplishments. My questions about school or soccer were answered with distracted nods before the conversation inevitably turned back to the baby. The final break came when I was 14. After weeks of reminding him my father had promised to attend my journalism award ceremony at school, I was receiving recognition for an essay that had won a regional contest. The ceremony started at 7, and by 7:30 I was still glancing at the door between every presentation, watching for his face. He never showed. When I called him afterwards, he answered in a whispered voice. "Sorry, Al. Zoe has an ear infection. We've been at the pediatrician all afternoon. It completely slipped my mind." The hurt crystallized into something harder. "You promised Dad. This was important to me." "Don't be difficult, Allie," he sighed. "You need to grow up and understand I have responsibilities. Zoe is just a baby. She needs me." "I needed you too," I said, my voice breaking. "We'll talk about this later," he replied. "Jessica needs help with the medicine." Later never came. He texted a few days after with a generic apology and an Amazon gift card. Our communications dwindled to holiday texts and occasional likes on social media posts. By 15, I had effectively been erased from my father's daily life, replaced by the family he actually wanted. While my father's abandonment happened in stages, my mother's felt like watching someone fade away in slow motion right before my eyes. For the first 2 years after the divorce, Mom tried to compensate for Dad's gradual disappearance by becoming super mom. We had girls-only weekends with manicures and movies. She attended every school event, chaperoned field trips, and joined the PTA. "It's you and me against the world, Allie Bear," she would say, using my childhood nickname as we made popcorn for our Friday movie nights. I leaned into our closeness, grateful that at least one parent seemed determined to keep their promises. But as Mom's event planning business grew more successful, her presence decreased proportionally. Business trips that once lasted a weekend stretched to a week. Her phone became permanently attached to her hand, emails and client calls interrupting our conversations mid-sentence. "This is for us," she would explain while typing frantically at the dinner table. "These clients mean security, a better future." By the time I was 11, I was staying home alone more often than not. I learned to cook simple meals, to do my own laundry, to get myself up for school when Mom had early meetings or late nights. I became fiercely independent out of necessity rather than choice. When I was 12, Mom returned from a conference in Seattle with more than new clients. She couldn't stop talking about Michael, the hotel developer she had met while planning a corporate event. He was successful, Charming, sophisticated, everything my accountant father apparently wasn't. "You'll love him," she assured me, showing pictures on her phone of a tall man with salt and pepper hair and an expensive watch. "He's excited to meet you." Their relationship moved at warp speed. Michael flew to Boston for weekends. Mom flew to Seattle when I stayed with Dad. Within 4 months, Michael had moved into our house, bringing designer luggage and opinions about everything from our furniture to our breakfast cereal. Michael wasn't unkind to me. He bought me gifts, expensive ones that showed he had money, but not that he knew anything about me. A designer purse when I preferred backpacks. Jewelry when I was in my soccer phase. He tried engaging me in conversations about business and investments when I wanted to talk about books or friends. "You're lucky, you know," Mom told me one night after I had been quiet at dinner. "Many men wouldn't be interested in a woman with a child from another marriage. Michael is different." I nodded because arguing seemed pointless. But I noticed how our home had transformed in subtle ways, family photos replaced with abstract art, my artwork removed from the refrigerator because it cluttered the kitchen aesthetic, my presence increasingly treated as an afterthought in their glamorous adult lives. The bomb dropped 6 months after Michael moved in. Mom sat me down in our living room, the same spot where she and Dad had told me about their divorce 4 years earlier. "Michael has been offered an amazing opportunity," she began, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. "He's being promoted to regional director, but it means relocating to the Seattle office." I stared at her, processing the implications. "We're moving to Seattle." Mom's eyes darted away from mine, focusing on a point over my shoulder. "It's an incredible opportunity for all of us. Better schools, beautiful surroundings, a fresh start." "But what about my school, my friends, my soccer team?" The panic rose in my chest. "What about Dad?" Despite his gradual fading from my life, he was still technically nearby. "We'd need to work out a new custody arrangement," she said, still not meeting my eyes. "Maybe summers and holidays with your father." The idea of leaving everything familiar sent me into a spiral of anxiety that manifested as stomach aches and sleepless nights. Mom interpreted my physical symptoms as manipulation rather than genuine distress. Michael suggested I was acting out because I was spoiled. 2 weeks later, the conversation shifted dramatically. Mom sat me down again, this time alone. "I've been talking with your father about the move," she began, voice carefully neutral. "Given everything with the baby and how settled you are in school here, we're thinking maybe you should stay with him while I get established in Seattle." The words hit like physical blows. "You want to leave me behind?" "Just temporarily," she insisted, though her eyes still wouldn't meet mine. "6 months, maybe a year until we're settled. Then you'd join us." That evening I called my father, something I rarely initiated anymore. His response shattered any remaining illusion that either parent prioritized me. "It's not a good time, Allie," he said, Zoe wailing in the background. "The baby's colicky and Jessica's at her wit's end. The guest room is being converted to a nursery anyway. We're trying for another baby. Your mom needs to figure something else out." In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity. I had become an inconvenience to both of them, a leftover obligation from a life they were both eager to leave behind. My mother's solution emerged a week later. "You'll stay with Grandma Margaret," she announced, as if this were a normal arrangement for a 13-year-old. "She's lonely since Grandpa died and her apartment has that second bedroom. It's the perfect solution." Perfect for whom, I wondered, but didn't ask. The day Mom left for Seattle remains etched in my memory. We stood in the airport, an awkward triangle of Mom, Michael, and me. Michael checked his watch repeatedly while Mom fussed with my hair and clothes. "We'll call every day," she promised, hugging me tightly. "And you'll come visit during Christmas break. It'll go so fast, you'll see." I nodded beyond tears at that point. Something had hardened inside me, a protective shell forming around my heart. The daily calls lasted exactly 2 weeks. Then they became every other day, then twice a week, then the Sunday night obligation call. Mom always had reasons: meetings running late, time zone differences, house hunting stress. Michael rarely came to the phone, and when he did, his contributions were limited to questions about my grades and comments about the weather. 3 months after moving to Seattle, Mom called with news. "We're pregnant," she announced, her voice higher than usual with excitement. You're going to have a little brother or sister, isn't that wonderful? The parallel to my father's announcement years earlier wasn't lost on me. History was repeating itself with painful precision. That's great, Mom. I said, the script familiar by now. Congratulations. The promised Christmas visit never materialized. The doctor advised against travel in my first trimester. Mom explained over the phone while I sat in Grandma Margaret's apartment surrounded by the few decorations we had managed to put up. We'll send your gifts, and maybe you can come for spring break instead. Spring break became summer, because the baby will be here by then, which became the baby's too small to have visitors, which eventually became no mention of visits at all. My half-brother Thomas was born when I was 14. Like my father before her, Mom became completely absorbed in her new family. Phone calls became short updates about Thomas's developments. Questions about my life were perfunctory, my answers clearly unheard, as I could hear her cooing to the baby in the background. The final abandonment came in stages so predictable I could have mapped them. The canceled video calls, the delayed responses to texts, the forgotten birthday when I turned 15, an electronic gift card arriving 3 days late with a generic message. The Christmas where I received a box of clothes all the wrong size and style, clearly purchased by an assistant. By my 16th birthday, communication had dwindled to occasional likes on social media and automated birthday texts. The promised temporary arrangement had become permanent without anyone ever saying so. My mother had chosen her new family, just as my father had chosen his. I was the discarded remnant of a past they both wanted to forget. Moving in with Grandma Margaret wasn't part of anyone's plan, least of all mine. Her one-bedroom plus den apartment in a senior living complex wasn't designed for a teenager. The den became my bedroom, a converted office space with a pull-out sofa and a desk where I did homework. The walls were thin enough that I could hear Mr. Kaplan's television next door until midnight every night. Grandma did her best. At 72 with arthritis that made cooking and cleaning difficult, she wasn't prepared to raise another child. But unlike my parents, she showed up consistently. She asked about my day over the simple dinners we shared. She attended school conferences, moving slowly with her cane but refusing to miss them. She kept a calendar of my activities on the refrigerator and circled important dates with red marker. "We're making do, aren't we, sweetheart?" she would say, as we ate spaghetti for the third time in a week, because it was easy on her hands to prepare. Her Social Security and small pension weren't designed to support a teenager, but she never complained about the additional expense I represented. School became a battleground after both parents effectively abandoned me. My grades, once consistently A's and B's, plummeted. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't see the point in algebraic equations or memorizing historical dates when my own history had been erased so completely. I skipped classes to sit in the library reading section, losing myself in fictional worlds where parents didn't discard children when more appealing options came along. The school counselor called me in after my English teacher reported concerning themes in my essays. Ms. Lawson was younger than the other counselors, with bright scarves and an office decorated with travel postcards. She didn't start with questions about my parents or my feelings. Instead, she asked about my writing. "Your English teacher says you have a remarkable voice," she said. "Raw and honest. Have you thought about writing for the school newspaper?" That question led to an after-school meeting with the journalism teacher, Mr. Brennan, who read my sample piece and immediately assigned me to cover the upcoming arts festival. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of interest in something beyond survival. The newspaper office became my sanctuary. Twice a week after school, I could sit at an outdated computer and transform my thoughts into words that other people would read. Mr. Brennan pushed me to dig deeper, to find the story behind the story, to develop my unique perspective. When my first byline appeared in print, I cut out the article and taped it beside my bed in Grandma's apartment. The ongoing emotional fallout manifested in other ways. I flinched when friends talked about their parents' involvement in their lives. I developed insomnia, staying awake until 2 or 3 in the morning, scrolling through social media, looking at the carefully curated photos my parents posted of their real children. I started therapy through a school program, sitting stiffly in an office once a week, talking to Dr. Winters about abandonment and self-worth. "It's not about you, Allie," Dr. Winters would say. "Their choices reflect their limitations, not your value." I nodded during these sessions, understanding the words intellectually while emotionally rejecting them. If I had been enough, they would have stayed. If I had been worthy of love, they would have fought to keep me in their lives. These beliefs burrowed deep, shaping my interactions with everyone around me. Financial reality hit hard when I turned 16. Grandma's fixed income couldn't stretch to cover the extras that teenagers needed: clothes, school activities, the occasional movie with friends. I applied at Gordon's Grocery, the neighborhood store within walking distance of our apartment. Mr. Gordon, the owner, hired me for 20 hours a week after school and on weekends. "You're a responsible young lady," he said after my interview. "Your grandmother comes in every Tuesday for her shopping. She speaks highly of you." The grocery store job taught me more than how to operate a cash register. Mr. Gordon, a 60-something widower whose own children lived out of state, became an unexpected mentor. He noticed when I was struggling with homework during slow periods and offered math help from his accounting background. He adjusted my schedule around exam weeks without me asking. He remembered my birthday with a small cake in the break room. "Family isn't always blood," he told me once when I mentioned my parents' absence. "Sometimes it's the people who show up when everyone else walks away." Grandma Margaret and I developed a routine. On Sundays, we would make a big pot of soup that could last for several meals during the week. I learned to check her medication, to schedule her doctor appointments, to help her balance her checkbook. Our roles reversed in subtle ways. I became the caretaker as much as the one being cared for. The stroke happened during my junior year. I came home from school to find Grandma on the kitchen floor, her right side limp, her speech slurred. The paramedics arrived within minutes of my 911 call, but those minutes stretched like hours as I held her hand and promised everything would be okay. At the hospital, the intake nurse asked about next of kin. "Her daughter, my mother," I said, providing Mom's contact information. "And my father," I added, though with less confidence. I called both parents while sitting in the waiting room, the antiseptic smell burning my nose, the fluorescent lights harsh against my eyes. Both conversations followed the same pattern: initial concern followed by excuses. "Oh, Allie, that's terrible," Mom said, the sound of my half-brother crying in the background. "But Thomas has an ear infection and Michael is out of town. There's no way I can get a flight right now." Dad's response was equally predictable. "Jessica's pregnant again and her doctor has put her on bed rest. I can't possibly leave her right now. Can't your mother's doctor handle things?" I hung up both calls with the same hollow feeling. In the moment when I needed parents the most, neither could be bothered to show up. The final threads of expectation snapped. I was truly on my own. The hospital social worker found me hours later, curled in a waiting room chair, my homework spread around me as I tried to maintain some normalcy. Ms. Rodriguez sat beside me, explaining Grandma's condition, the decisions that needed to be made, the forms that required signatures. "Is there another adult who can help with this?" she asked gently. "An aunt or uncle, perhaps?" I shook my head. "It's just me." At 17, I signed medical consent forms as the only available family member. I spoke with doctors about rehabilitation options. I arranged for a hospital bed to be delivered to our apartment. I learned about medication schedules and physical therapy exercises. I grew up completely in the space of that week. Tanya's family saved me from complete collapse. My best friend since freshman year, Tanya lived with her parents and 3 siblings in an apartment across town. When she learned about Grandma's stroke, her family sprang into action. Her mother, Mrs. Diaz, brought homemade meals to the hospital. Her father, Mr. Diaz, helped rearrange furniture in the apartment to accommodate Grandma's new needs. Her brothers carried in the hospital bed when it was delivered. "Your family now," Mrs. Diaz told me, hugging me tightly in the hospital corridor. "Whatever you need, we are here." During Grandma's 3-week hospital stay, I divided my time between schoolwork and the hospital. Mr. Gordon adjusted my schedule without reducing my hours, understanding that I needed both the income and the routine. Mr. Brennan allowed me to write my newspaper articles from the hospital waiting room. Ms. Lawson checked in daily, helping me navigate the medical system and emotional strain. Thanksgiving that year was spent at Tanya's apartment, a brief respite from the hospital routine. Their chaotic, loving household surrounded me with warmth that made the absence of my own parents less painful. Mrs. Diaz insisted I take leftovers for Grandma. Mr. Diaz drove me back to the hospital afterward, waiting until I was safely inside before pulling away. Despite everyone's efforts, Grandma never fully recovered. She returned home with limited mobility and slurred speech. Our roles completely reversed. I became the caretaker, scheduling home health aides with the limited insurance coverage, learning to help her bathe and dress, preparing soft foods she could manage. My childhood vanished completely in the face of these adult responsibilities. The school counseling office became another lifeline. Ms. Lawson helped me apply for emergency financial assistance programs. She connected me with college scholarship opportunities for students in challenging circumstances. She arranged for me to meet with the principal about a modified schedule that would allow me to complete my senior year while caring for Grandma. "You are the strongest person I know," she told me during one of our weekly meetings. "But even the strongest people need support." Grandma Margaret passed away in her sleep 3 months before my high school graduation. I found her when I went to help her get ready for breakfast, peaceful in her bed, her face relaxed in a way it hadn't been since the stroke. The grief was complicated gratitude that her suffering had ended, mixed with the devastating knowledge that my last blood relative who truly cared was gone. I called my parents with the news. Both expressed appropriate sympathy. Both sent flower arrangements to the small funeral I arranged with help from Mr. Gordon and the Diaz family. Both attended the service sitting on opposite sides of the chapel, both leaving immediately after the final prayer without staying for the reception. Neither offered me a place to live, though I was still 17. Neither asked about my plans or needs. Standing by Grandma's grave, surrounded by her few remaining friends and the surrogate family I had cobbled together, I realized I had been orphaned in slow motion over years, not by death, but by choice. Their choice to walk away, my choice to keep standing. The scholarship award letter arrived 3 days after Grandma's funeral. Full tuition to State University's journalism program, with a stipend for books. I sat on the floor of the apartment, clutching the paper, tears streaming down my face. The path forward had appeared just when I needed it most. Ms. Lawson helped me navigate the guardianship issues since I would turn 18 shortly after graduation. The court appointed her as my temporary guardian, a role she accepted with characteristic grace. Mr. Gordon offered to store Grandma's furniture in his garage until I had a place for it. Mrs. Diaz insisted I stay with them until college began. "You focus on finishing school strong," she said, making space in Tanya's room for my belongings. "Let the adults handle the rest for once." Graduation day brought mixed emotions. Looking out from the stage as I gave my speech as newspaper editor, I spotted the Diaz family cheering wildly. Mr. Gordon and Ms. Lawson sat together, both beaming with pride. My parents were notably absent. Neither had responded to the invitation I had sent out of obligation rather than hope. College orientation that August marked the beginning of my truly independent life. The dormitory room I shared with a stranger felt like luxury after the converted den at Grandma's apartment. The campus buzzed with possibilities, new classes, new people, new beginnings. Financial independence meant working 2 jobs around my class schedule. Mornings at the campus coffee shop, evenings and weekends at the university bookstore. Between shifts, I studied in the library, determined to maintain the scholarship that made my education possible. Sleep became a luxury social life and afterthought. But for the first time, every decision was mine alone. Dr. Abrams, my freshman psychology professor, noticed the dark circles under my eyes about 2 months into the semester. After class one day, she asked me to stay behind. "You're one of my strongest students," she said, "but you look like you're running on empty. Is everything all right?" Something about her genuine concern cracked the careful facade I had constructed. The whole story poured out my parents' gradual abandonment, Grandma's death, my current juggling act of work and school. Dr. Abrams listened without interrupting, her expression compassionate but not pitying. "The university has resources for students in your situation," she said when I finally ran out of words, "including counseling services that are already covered by your student fees." The twice-monthly sessions with Dr. Powell became another anchor in my new life. Unlike my previous therapy experiences, these sessions focused not just on processing past trauma, but on building a future beyond it. Dr. Powell introduced concepts that would become foundational to my healing journey: authenticity, boundaries, chosen family, post-traumatic growth. "Your parents' abandonment doesn't define you," she would remind me. It informs your story, but it isn't the whole story. Journalism became my sanctuary and purpose. The university newspaper welcomed me as a staff writer during my freshman year. By sophomore year, I had been promoted to features editor. Professor Garcia, the journalism department chair, became another mentor, pushing me to develop my distinct voice. "You have a natural empathy that translates to the page," he told me after reading a piece I wrote about student homelessness. "You see people's humanity in situations others might sensationalize." My first real apartment came at the start of junior year, a tiny studio with a kitchenette and bathroom smaller than some closets. But it was mine, paid for entirely by my own earnings. I furnished it with pieces from thrift stores and items retrieved from Mr. Gordon's garage. Grandma's reading lamp sat beside my bed. Her quilt covered the futon that served as both couch and bed. Her china teacup held my pens on the desk. On my 23rd birthday, I received an unexpected package from Ms. Lawson, who had kept in touch through occasional emails. Inside was a journal bound in soft leather with a note, "For the next chapter of your story." That night, I began documenting my journey not as a victim of abandonment, but as the author of my own life. The internship at the city newspaper during my senior year led to a job offer upon graduation. The position at Digital Trends Media came 2 years later, offering better pay and the opportunity to write longer-form features. My tiny studio apartment gave way to a one-bedroom with actual countertop space in the kitchen and a bathroom where I could turn around without hitting a wall. At 25, I achieved a milestone I had once thought impossible: homeownership. The one-bedroom condo wasn't glamorous with its outdated kitchen and bathroom that needed renovation. But when the real estate agent handed me the keys, I felt a sense of permanence I had lacked since childhood. That night, I sat on the floor of the empty living room, Grandma's quilt wrapped around my shoulders, and allowed myself to feel proud of how far I'd come. Luna entered my life a week after I moved into the condo. The animal shelter called her a mixed breed, but she was clearly part border collie with her black and white markings and intelligent eyes. The shelter volunteer explained she had been abandoned when her previous family moved away, left tied to a fence with no food or water. "She has trust issues," the volunteer warned. "She'll need someone patient." Looking into Luna's wary eyes, I recognized a kindred spirit. "We'll figure it out together," I said, signing the adoption papers. Luna and I developed our own rituals and traditions. Morning walks in the park near our condo, Sunday afternoon hikes on nearby trails, movie nights with her curled beside me on the couch, Christmas morning with special treats wrapped in paper she delighted in tearing open. She slept at the foot of my bed every night, a constant presence I could count on. Dating proved more challenging than career development or pet ownership. Trust didn't come easily after watching both parents replace me so completely. Each relationship followed a similar pattern: initial connection, growing closeness, then withdrawal when vulnerability became too threatening. I became an expert at finding exit strategies before anyone could leave me first. Daniel broke the pattern. We met through a mutual friend at a charity fundraiser, his quiet confidence and lack of pressure distinctive from the beginning. He asked questions and actually listened to my answers. He respected boundaries without taking them personally. He shared his own story of parents who divorced when he was young, but who had both remained actively involved in his life. "I got lucky," he said over dinner on our third date. "I know not everyone has parents who put their kids first." The simple acknowledgement that my experience wasn't the norm opened a door I had kept firmly shut. Slowly, carefully, I let him see parts of my story. Instead of offering platitudes or trying to fix things, he simply held space for my experiences. "I can't change what happened," he said one night after I shared particularly painful memories. "But I can be here now, and I'm not planning to go anywhere." 6 months into our relationship, Daniel was still showing up consistently. He remembered important dates without prompts. He celebrated my work accomplishments with genuine enthusiasm. He understood my need for independence while offering support without strings. For the first time, I began to believe that not everyone leaves. The article that changed my career trajectory started as a personal journal entry, after a particularly difficult therapy session. Processing my parents' abandonment, I wrote about the invisible epidemic of emotionally abandoned children, those not dramatic enough for intervention, but damaged nonetheless by parents who chose new families and discarded previous commitments. Professor Garcia, with whom I still kept in contact, read the anonymous version I shared with him and urged me to develop it for publication. "This isn't just your story," he said. "It's the story of thousands of children caught in the aftermath of family reconfiguration." The feature article, published under a pseudonym, resonated beyond anything I had previously written. Emails flooded my professional account sharing similar stories of parental abandonment for new spouses, new children, new priorities. The comment section filled with people who had never seen their experiences articulated so clearly. One comment in particular caught my attention. "Reading this was like finding a name for an illness I didn't know other people had. Thank you for showing me I'm not alone." The idea of connection through shared experience sparked something new: an online support group for adults who had experienced parental abandonment. The group started small, just 12 members meeting via video chat once a month to share stories and coping strategies. Within 6 months, it had grown to over 100 participants across multiple time zones. I facilitated discussions, arranged for occasional guest speakers with therapeutic backgrounds, and watched as healing happened in real time through community. "You've created something important here," Daniel told me after overhearing one of the sessions. "You've turned your pain into purpose." By 27, my life had achieved a stability I once couldn't imagine. My career was thriving with a recent promotion to senior feature writer. My relationship with Daniel had deepened into something I cautiously called love. My chosen family circle of close friends, mentors, and fellow abandonment survivors provided the support network my biological family had failed to maintain. I had created traditions of my own holidays spent with the Diaz family, who still included me in their celebrations. Monthly dinners with Mr. Gordon, now retired but still full of wisdom and bad jokes. Annual campus visits with Ms. Lawson, who had become a cherished friend. Weekend hiking trips with Daniel and Luna. A life built deliberately, brick by brick, from the rubble of my parents' choices. What I didn't expect was that my carefully constructed peace would face its greatest challenge from the very people who had walked away years before. The email arrived on my 27th birthday, its ordinary presence in my inbox belying the emotional earthquake it contained. The subject line read simply, "Happy birthday," but the sender's name made my heart stutter. William Parker, my father. I stared at it for nearly an hour before finding the courage to click. The message itself was surprisingly casual, as if we had spoken last week instead of exchanging only obligatory holiday texts for the past decade. "Happy birthday, Allie. Hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about you a lot lately and would love to catch up over coffee sometime. I'm back in Boston permanently now. Jessica and I finalized our divorce last month. It's been a tough time, but I'm focused on rebuilding. Zoe is 17 now and asking about her big sister. Let me know when you're free. Love, Dad." No acknowledgement of his years of absence. No recognition of the milestones he had missed: my high school graduation, college graduation, first job, first home. Just a casual invitation for coffee, as if we were distant acquaintances who had simply lost touch. The panic attack hit without warning. One moment I was sitting at my desk, staring at the screen; the next, I was on the floor, lungs burning, vision tunneling, body convinced I was dying. Luna nudged at my face, her cold nose grounding me enough to fumble for my phone. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, using the key I had given him just a month before. He sat beside me on the floor, talking in a low, steady voice until my breathing normalized. He didn't ask questions, didn't push for explanations. He simply stayed, his presence a testament to what real support looked like. Later that evening, after Daniel had made sure I ate something and was settled with Luna on the couch, I showed him the email. "What do you want to do?" he asked after reading it twice. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to ignore it completely. Part of me wants to respond with every painful memory he's left me with, and some small stupid part still wants his approval, his love." Daniel nodded. "All of those feelings make sense. You don't have to decide tonight." The next morning, I forwarded the email to Dr. Powell with a request for an emergency session. The therapeutic space provided room to untangle the complicated emotions my father's reappearance had triggered. We spent 2 sessions exploring potential responses from complete silence to cautious engagement. There's no single right answer, Dr. Powell reminded me. The question is, what serves your healing, not what serves his need for absolution. I decided not to respond immediately. Instead, I brought the situation to my abandonment support group, seeking wisdom from others who had faced similar reappearances of absent parents. My mother came back when she needed a kidney donor, one member shared. The audacity of expecting my body parts after discarding me emotionally for 20 years. My father showed up at my college graduation uninvited, another said. Tried to take credit for my achievements when he hadn't contributed a dime or a minute to my education. Their stories strengthened my resolve to proceed with caution. I drafted and deleted a dozen responses, none feeling quite right. Ultimately, I chose to wait to sit with the disruption and see if my father would demonstrate any consistency in his renewed interest. 2 months passed without further contact from him. I had almost convinced myself the birthday email had been a momentary impulse on his part, easily forgotten, when my mother suddenly reappeared through an equally unexpected channel, a Facebook friend request. The profile picture showed her looking much the same as I remembered, though with more defined lines around her eyes and mouth. According to her profile, she had moved back to Boston 6 months earlier. Her relationship status read, divorced. The synchronicity of both parents returning to Boston and reaching out within months of each other seemed too calculated to be coincidence. Her message followed shortly after I accepted the request, more out of curiosity than forgiveness. Allie, it's so wonderful to reconnect. You've grown into such a beautiful young woman. I've been following your career from afar. Your writing is exceptional. Things didn't work out with Michael and the Seattle Step family as I had hoped. Thomas and I moved back to Boston for a fresh start. He's 13 now and would love to meet his big sister. I'm hoping we can get together soon. I've missed you so much. Like my father's message, hers contained no acknowledgement of her abandonment, no apology for the years of absence, no recognition of the life I had built entirely without her support. The casual mention of following my career from afar felt particularly galling. She could have reached out at any point, but chose not to until she needed something. I showed the message to Daniel that evening. Is it just me, or does this feel coordinated with my father's email? I asked. The timing is suspicious, he agreed. Have you responded to either of them? I shook my head. I'm still processing, but now I'm wondering what's really behind this sudden interest in reconnection. The answer began revealing itself through escalating contact attempts. My father sent a follow-up email mentioning he had fallen on hard times after the divorce and was temporarily staying with a friend until things stabilized. My mother texted asking if I knew of any job openings at my media company, as she was between opportunities. Then my father appeared at my workplace without warning. I was returning from lunch when I spotted him in the lobby looking older than I remembered his once immaculate appearance, now slightly rumpled. He waved as if we had planned to meet. Surprise, he called, moving toward me for a hug I couldn't bring myself to return. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd take a chance on catching you. The conversation that followed was painfully superficial. He commented on the office building, asked generic questions about my job, and mentioned repeatedly how proud he was of me. No reference to his absence during my formative years, no acknowledgement of the milestones he had missed. Just an awkward attempt at rekindling a relationship that had effectively ended when I was 14. As he was leaving, he mentioned casually, I'm looking for a new place. The rental market is brutal right now. Does your building have any vacancies? Or maybe you have a spare room, just until I get back on my feet. The real motivation crystallized with perfect clarity. This wasn't about reconnection or regret. This was about convenience, his needs, his situation. I was once again being viewed as a resource rather than a person with valid feelings about his abandonment. My mother's approach was slightly more subtle, but followed the same pattern. Small gifts began appearing at my apartment: flowers, a scarf, a box of chocolates. Each came with cards expressing how much she had always loved me and how excited she was to rebuild our relationship. Then came the lunch invitation to catch up properly. We met at a restaurant near my office, her choice. She arrived wearing an outfit that screamed effort, expensive but slightly too youthful for her age. Too much jewelry, too much perfume. The desperate energy was palpable. The lunch began with her monologue about the divorce from Michael, the challenges of single parenthood with Thomas, the difficulty of reestablishing herself professionally in Boston. Only after 30 minutes of her narrative did she ask a single question about my life. "So, do you own your condo or rent?" she inquired while studying the dessert menu. "I own it," I replied, increasingly certain where this conversation was heading. "That's wonderful. Such an accomplishment at your age. Is it a one-bedroom or two?" Before I could answer, she continued, "Thomas and I are staying in a terrible extended stay hotel while I look for something permanent. The costs are eating through my savings. Michael's being difficult about the settlement, of course. I was thinking perhaps we could stay with you just for a few weeks until things stabilize. It would be such a wonderful opportunity for you and Thomas to bond as siblings." The audacity left me momentarily speechless. This woman who had chosen another family over me, who had effectively abandoned me as a teenager, was now assuming she could insert herself into my hard-earned stability when her new life fell apart. "That won't be possible." I finally managed my voice steadier than I felt. "My place is quite small and I work from home frequently. It wouldn't be a suitable arrangement." Her expression shifted from hopeful to annoyed in an instant. "Family should help family, Allie. I would have thought all those articles you write about human connection would translate to more compassion for your own mother." The guilt attempt was so transparent it almost made me laugh. "I've built my life without family help," I replied. "I've learned that family is defined by consistent presence, not biological connection." The lunch ended shortly after with promises to stay in touch that felt hollow from both sides. As I watched her walk away, I realized she had never once asked about my emotional well-being, my feelings about her years of absence, or expressed genuine remorse for her choices. The coordinated campaign intensified when a distant cousin's wedding created the perfect ambush opportunity. I hadn't planned to attend until the bride Jenny called personally to request my presence. We weren't close, but her genuine enthusiasm made it difficult to refuse. I should have been suspicious when she mentioned the whole family will be there, with unusual emphasis. Instead, I agreed to attend with Daniel, seeing it as an opportunity to maintain connections with the extended family members who had occasionally reached out over the years. The setup became clear the moment I walked into the reception hall. Both my parents were not only in attendance but seated at the same table assigned to me. They converged immediately, all smiles and forced enthusiasm, creating a public reunion scene that made escape impossible without causing a disruption. "Isn't this wonderful?" my mother gushed loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "The family together again after all this time." My father placed an arm around my shoulders that I immediately shrugged off. "We have so much catching up to do," he announced to anyone listening. "My brilliant daughter, the writer." Throughout the reception, they tag-teamed their approach. One would corner me at the bar while I tried to get a drink. The other would appear beside Daniel, pumping him for information about our relationship and my life. They made a point of introducing themselves to distant relatives as Allie's parents, with no qualification about their long absence. The situation escalated when my father, emboldened by several glasses of champagne, began a toast that wasn't part of the wedding program. "I want to acknowledge my amazing daughter, Allie," he began, raising his glass. "Despite some challenging years, family always finds its way back together." The presumption, the rewriting of history in public, broke something in me. I stood up my chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "Challenging years," I repeated, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet table. "Is that what you call abandoning your child for your new family? Is that what Mom calls moving across the country and forgetting she had a daughter?" My father's face flushed. "That's not fair, Allie. We were all doing our best in a difficult situation. Your best was deciding your new wife and baby deserved all your attention while I deserved none," I replied, years of suppressed anger finally finding voice. "Mom's best was leaving me with Grandma when I was 13 because her boyfriend didn't want another man's child around. Neither of you showed up when Grandma had a stroke. Neither of you offered me a home when she died." My mother's expression hardened. "You're making a scene at your cousin's wedding. This is hardly the time or place." Yet it was the perfect time and place for you both to ambush me, to pretend we're one big happy family when the only reason you've contacted me is because you both need something. Several relatives had gathered around, drawn by the confrontation. Cousin Jenny's mother, my mother's sister, stepped in. Allie, everyone deserves a second chance. They're still your parents. Being a parent requires showing up, I said, gathering my purse. It means putting your child's needs before your convenience. Neither of them has earned the title. Daniel appeared at my side, his steady presence a reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. I think we should go, he said quietly. As we made our way toward the exit, my father called after me. You're being childish. Allie family forgives. I turned back one last time. Family shows up before forgiveness is required. You both wanted new families and you got them. I've built my own family too, one that actually shows up. I don't need or want either of you in my life. Walking out of that reception hall with Daniel beside me felt like the final step in a journey that had begun the day my parents first sat me down to explain their divorce. For the first time, I had spoken my truth without apology, without minimizing their choices to spare their feelings. The weight of unmet expectations and lingering hope for parental love lifted, replaced by the certainty that I had everything I needed already. The days following the wedding confrontation brought a strange sense of peace. I had finally said aloud what I had carried silently for years. The carefully constructed facade that allowed my parents to believe their abandonment had been acceptable, even forgettable, had cracked completely. The truth hung in the air between us, impossible to ignore or rewrite. My phone filled with voicemails and texts from both parents, alternating between defensive justifications and attempts at guilt. You've always been so sensitive, my mother wrote. We did what we thought was best at the time, my father claimed. Neither message contained the simple words that might have mattered. I'm sorry for leaving you. Daniel found me on the balcony of my condo the evening after the wedding, Luna curled at my feet staring out at the city lights. He placed a cup of tea beside me and sat in the adjacent chair. Any regrets about yesterday? He asked. I considered the question carefully. Not about what I said. Maybe about the setting. Cousin Jenny didn't deserve to have her reception turned into the Parker family showdown. He nodded. I called her this morning, sent flowers. She was understanding, actually said she was impressed by your honesty. That was so typical of Daniel, quiet problem-solving, taking care of details, supporting without taking over. In that moment, the contrast between his consistent presence and my parents' convenient reappearance couldn't have been clearer. I think I need to formally end this, I said. Not with another confrontation, but with clarity. For my own closure. The email took 3 days to compose, each word carefully chosen. I sent identical versions to both parents, a final statement of boundaries. I've had time to reflect on our recent interactions and my response at the wedding. While I regret the public nature of that conversation, I stand by the substance of what I said. Both of you made choices throughout my childhood and adolescence that clearly communicated I was not a priority in your lives. You both chose new families and effectively abandoned me emotionally and practically. I built my life without parental support. I worked through school, secured scholarships, developed a career, bought a home, and created meaningful relationships, all without guidance or assistance from either of you. The resilience and independence you now seem to admire was forged through necessity, not choice. Your sudden reappearance in my life coincides suspiciously with your own personal and financial difficulties. The timing suggests you see me as a resource, rather than as a daughter you genuinely wish to reconnect with. You've shown no real acknowledgement of the hurt your abandonment caused, no authentic remorse for your absence during critical years of my development. I want to be clear, I am not available to provide financial support, housing, or emotional labor to either of you. The time for a parent-child relationship has passed. While I don't harbor active hatred, I also don't have space in my life for conditional, convenience-based connection. I wish you both well in rebuilding your lives, but I will be doing so separately from you. Please respect this boundary by not contacting me further. Hitting send brought neither satisfaction nor regret, just a quiet certainty that this chapter was finally closing. The choice to protect my hard-won peace wasn't about punishment, but preservation. Some relationships cannot and should not be salvaged, especially when the damage stems from fundamental disregard for a child's emotional needs. Processing this final separation required returning to therapy. Dr. Powell helped me work through the lingering guilt that society attaches to cutting contact with parents, regardless of their behavior. We explored the difference between forgiveness as an internal process of letting go versus reconciliation as an active rebuilding of relationship. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, she explained during one particularly powerful session. You can release the anger and resentment for your own healing without allowing people who have harmed you back into your life. This distinction became a cornerstone of my healing. I could acknowledge that my parents had likely done the best they could with their limited emotional capacities without excusing their choices or inviting them to hurt me again. I could wish them well from a distance without sacrificing the boundaries necessary for my well-being. The online support group provided another avenue for processing. Many members had faced similar dilemmas: estranged parents reappearing when they needed something extended, family pressuring for reconciliation, regardless of past harm, the internal conflict between cultural expectations of family obligation and personal needs for safety. I realized I was carrying shame that belonged to them, one member shared. Their failure to parent properly wasn't my burden to bear. This perspective resonated deeply. The shame I had internalized as a child, the belief that I must have been fundamentally unlovable for both parents to leave, wasn't mine. It belonged squarely with the adults who had chosen new spouses, new children, new lives over their existing responsibilities. Gradually, the emotional intensity around my parents' reappearance subsided. Neither responded directly to my email, though my mother sent a final text that read simply, "I hope someday you'll see things differently." My father's last communication came through a mutual acquaintance. "Tell Allie I'll always be her dad whether she accepts that or not." Both messages reinforced my decision. Their focus remained on their feelings, their identities, their needs. With this chapter firmly closed, I could turn fully toward the life I had built. Daniel and I moved in together, combining our separate apartments into a slightly larger condo with space for both his books and my writing desk room for Luna's bed, and the houseplants he somehow kept alive. The transition felt natural, a merging of lives already intertwined. My career continued its upward trajectory. The personal essay about parental abandonment expanded into a memoir manuscript written in evening hours and weekend mornings. My editor at the publishing house described it as unflinchingly honest without being vindictive, the balance I had sought to achieve. The support group grew beyond my capacity to facilitate alone. I developed a training program for additional group leaders, many of them longtime members who had progressed in their own healing journeys. What had begun as a small circle of shared pain evolved into a nationwide network of mutual support and empowerment. On my 30th birthday, Daniel organized a surprise gathering of the people who had formed my chosen family over the years. Mr. Gordon drove in from his retirement community, still sharp-witted and warm. Ms. Lawson flew in from Colorado, where she had moved to be near grandchildren. The Diaz family arrived with enough food to feed an Army Tanya now with her own partner and a baby on the way. Colleagues from the newspaper and media company filled out the circle, along with friends who had shown up consistently through the years. Looking around the room that evening, I was struck by the realization that what I had lost in biological family, I had gained tenfold in chosen connections. These were people who loved me for exactly who I was, who had demonstrated their commitment through actions rather than mere biology or obligation. The memoir was published on the anniversary of Grandma Margaret's death, dedicated to her memory and to all the substitute parents who step in when biological ones step out. The response was overwhelming: emails and letters from readers who saw their own experiences reflected, who found validation for difficult boundaries they had set, who felt less alone in their complicated family narratives. My parents' silence following the book's publication spoke volumes. No defensive rebuttals, no attempts to contact me through alternate channels, no public comments. Perhaps they finally understood that their chapter in my story had concluded, that the adult I had become no longer needed or wanted their belated attention. The most profound healing came through the realization that their abandonment, while painful, had shaped me in ways that made me stronger, more empathetic, more intentional about the connections I formed. The resilience forged through necessity became my greatest asset. The ability to build family from friendship became my most valued skill. On quiet evenings with Daniel and Luna in busy newsrooms, collaborating with colleagues during support group sessions, witnessing others' growth, I found myself grateful not for what I had lost, but for what I had built from that loss. The empty spaces left by absent parents had filled with chosen family, meaningful work, and authentic connection. Family, I learned, is not about blood or obligation. It's about consistent presence, about showing up in both celebration and crisis. It's about choosing to remain connected when it would be easier to walk away. It's about love demonstrated through actions, rather than merely claimed through relation. For those of you watching who might be struggling with similar family fractures, know this: your worth is not determined by those who left. Your capacity to love and be loved remains intact. You can build a life rich with connection even if the people who should have loved you first failed in that fundamental task. The family you create can become more significant than the family you were born into. The boundaries you set are not selfish, but sacred, protecting the peace you deserve. And sometimes walking away from toxic connections is the healthiest choice you can make, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. If my story resonates with you, please share your experiences in the comments below. Have you had to set difficult boundaries with family? How have you built your chosen family? Like and subscribe if you found value in this conversation, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in navigating complicated family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like walking away with your head held high.